The BRICS nations are pressing for reforms that better reflect the economic realities of the 21st century. They contend that the present IMF and WTO frameworks disproportionately benefit wealthier nations and fail to appropriately meet the Global South's concerns. Their requests include altering the IMF's quota system to increase developing nations' influence and restoring the WTO's dispute settlement mechanism to full capacity. As a result, the Global South is committed to revamping the present Western-centric financial system, and it is even considering the establishment of alternative institutions to fit its requirements. In this video, we look at the causes of widespread unhappiness with the IMF and the policies in many Global South countries where IMF-backed loans have had terrible consequences for both residents and the economy. Let us begin now. Brazil. When a major economic crisis struck in the late 1990s, Brazil appealed to the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, for help stabilizing its currency and economy. In November 1998, the IMF authorized a large $41.5 billion bailout package based on Brazil implementing strict austerity measures and structural reforms to decrease fiscal deficits and strengthen economic stability. The mandatory austerity measures included severe cuts in public expenditure, greater taxes, and public sector changes. As a result, Brazil's government cut spending on key services such as healthcare, education, and social security, reducing their accessibility and quality while disproportionately impacting vulnerable and low-income populations. Citizens and labor groups expressed fury over these policies, accusing the IMF of exacerbating poverty and inequality. Protests broke out across the country, with opponents claiming that the emphasis on fiscal austerity stifled economic growth and social progress, increasing unemployment and civil unrest. Nonetheless, some experts feel that these austerity and structural changes were critical to Brazil's long-term economic stability, helping to contain hyperinflation, restore investor confidence, and lay the groundwork for future prosperity. Brazil's early repayment of IMF loans in 2005 under President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva's administration is widely touted as proof of the country's regaining financial sovereignty and improving economic situation. However, there is ongoing dispute about the usefulness of IMF-imposed austerity measures. While these measures may have stabilized the macroeconomy, they had a significant social cost, raising worries about balancing economic reforms and social welfare. The Brazilian situation exemplifies the complex relationship between international financial aid, local policy execution, and the socio-economic issues that the population faces. Indonesia. The Asian financial crisis hit Indonesia particularly hard in the late 1990s, resulting in a severe devaluation of the rupiah, skyrocketing inflation, and tremendous economic upheaval. In October 1997, President Suharto's administration obtained a $43 billion bailout from the International Monetary Fund, or IMF. The ensuing austerity measures sparked widespread public anger. By May 1998, widespread demonstrations had erupted, culminating in deadly riots in Jakarta and elsewhere. Protesters targeted symbols of wealth and power, causing massive property destruction and theft. Much of the violence was directed against the Chinese-Indonesian community. The government responded by mobilizing armed forces to restore order, which resulted in several deaths. Estimates vary. However, some sources estimate the death toll higher than 1,000. The erosion of public trust in Suharto's leadership, along with rising criticism, pushed him to quit on May 21, 1998, after 31 years in office. The events of 1998 began Indonesia's Reformasi era, which was marked by democratic changes and improved government transparency. Nonetheless, the crisis and IMF-imposed austerity had a lasting impact on Indonesian society. molding popular perceptions toward foreign financial institutions and directing economic policy for years to come. Egypt saw widespread social unrest in January 1977, known as the bread riots, as the government chose to reduce subsidies on essential food products. This measure, designed to win financial assistance from groups such as the International Monetary Fund, IMF, resulted in quick and significant price increases in commodities such as bread, sugar, rice, and cooking oil. These unexpected price rises sparked protests in major cities as Cairo, Alexandria, and Suez. The unrest began on January 18, 1977, with workers in industrial districts such as Helwan organizing strikes and demonstrations. Students and other residents quickly joined in, culminating in massive rallies with participants screaming slogans against the government and its economic policies. Tensions rose as protesters targeted symbols of authority and wealth, such as police stations, government buildings, and high-end hotels. They also targeted public transit, causing extensive property damage. On January 20th, President Anwar Sadat dispatched the military to restore order, sparking clashes that resulted in around 80 deaths, over 550 wounded, and 1,200 arrests. With mounting pressure and popular resistance, the administration was obliged to reverse its decision and return subsidies, calming the situation. Morocco had serious economic challenges in May 1981, including a substantial budget deficit and mounting external debt. To address these concerns, King Hassan II's administration reached an agreement with the International Monetary Fund that required austerity measures, most notably the elimination of subsidies on essential foods, like wheat, sugar, oil, milk, and butter. Prices rose proportionately by 40% for wheat, 50% for sugar, 28% for oil, 14% for milk, and 76% for butter. The unexpected rise in food prices provoked widespread outrage, culminating in the Casablanca bread riots on May 29, 1981. Thousands of underprivileged people flocked to the streets, attacking symbols of affluence including banks, pharmacies, grocery stores, and flashy cars. The administration responded quickly and forcefully. Police and military personnel opened fire on protesters. Official statistics put the death toll at 66, but opposition figures say it was 637, with many of the victims being young people from slum neighborhoods. The harsh crackdown has lasting social and political consequences. These incidents underlined the instability of implementing austerity measures in a population reliant on subsidized goods, as well as the friction between foreign financial institutions' economic changes and Morocco's socio-economic reality. This moment is a striking reminder of the fragile link between economic policy and social cohesiveness throughout the country's history. Nigeria was in the midst of a severe economic collapse by the mid-1880s, with declining oil income, rising external debt, and diminishing foreign reserves. In July 1986, under General Ibrahim Babangida, the government implemented a structural adjustment program developed in collaboration with the IMF. The initiative aimed to diversify the economy beyond oil exports, boost non-oil businesses, and attain fiscal balance. However, it created immediate pain for Nigerians. The currency's depreciation produced inflation, raising the cost of imported commodities and other necessities, while the removal of subsidies increased living expenditures for people on low incomes. Public discontent resulted in anti-SAP riots in May and June 1989. The demonstrations began on May 24, 1989, at the University of Benin, where students marched with a mock coffin and green leaves, singing slogans like "SAP must go" and "SAP is a vampire." The movement quickly expanded across the country, combining students, workers, and other organizations in key cities including Lagos, Ibadan, and Benin City, resulting in severe battles with security forces. The government's response, which included military deployment, resulted in numerous fatalities and arrests. The program's tight regulations slowed the economy, increased unemployment, and harmed public services. These austerity measures bore severely on the social fabric, exacerbating poverty and inequality. The government's harsh suppression of dissent further destabilized the political environment, undermining popular faith in leaders. While some believe that these changes were necessary to ensure Nigeria's long-term economic security, the immediate social consequences proved high. This era is frequently mentioned as an example of the perils of implementing externally imposed economic policies in the absence of adequate social safety nets. Let us take a little stop. If you've loved the film thus far, might we ask for a tiny favor? Hitting the like button allows us to reach a larger audience, and giving your views or criticism in the comments has an even greater influence. Thank you for watching. Now let's get back in. Venezuela entered a serious economic crisis in February 1989 due to a sharp decrease in oil income and rising external debt. President Carlos Andrés Pérez responded by implementing IMF-recommended austerity measures known as El Gran Viraje, or the Great Turn, aimed at restoring economic stability through structural changes. The rapid implementation of these regulations sparked popular outrage. On February 27, 1989, demonstrations erupted in Guaira, near Caracas, in response to bus price increases. The unrest quickly spread to Caracas and other cities, resulting in large-scale rallies, rioting, and looting known as El Caracazo. President Pérez announced a state of emergency, suspending constitutional rights. Government soldiers were ordered to quash the insurrection, which resulted in widespread bloodshed. Officially, 277 people were killed, although independent estimates put the death toll between 2,000 and 5,000, mostly at the hands of security forces. The crackdown destroyed faith in established politics, paving the way for Hugo Chavez, then a lieutenant colonel, to stage a failed coup in 1992 and then win the president in 1998 by capitalizing on popular dissatisfaction. El Caracazo is seen as a watershed moment in Venezuelan history, highlighting the profound socio-economic differences and the explosive consequences of sudden economic changes. Since 1988, Pakistan has frequently entered into agreements with the International Monetary Fund, each requiring austerity measures and subsidy reductions to control budget deficits and promote economic stability. Often, these actions have caused enormous public outrage, resulting in demonstrations and political instability. Pakistan's original IMF deals called for structural adjustment plans, including subsidy cutbacks on essential products and currency depreciation. Prices for vital items skyrocketed, affecting low-income groups and creating public outrage. Under President Pervez Musharraf, the government received about $2 billion in IMF loans across two programs. The mandated austerity policies lowered government expenditure and increased subsidy cuts, exacerbating resident suffering, sparking protests, and deepening political upheaval. Opposition to the IMF's suggested measures has persisted. In October 2024, for example, the government hiked taxes by 40% as part of an IMF bailout accord, sparking widespread demonstrations. Critics argued that these austerity policies exacerbate inflation and unemployment while straining public services. Supporters, on the other hand, think that such reforms are essential for creating long-term budgetary stability and addressing underlying economic shortcomings. During the 1990s, Kenya implemented structural adjustment plans recommended by the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank to address financial difficulties such as deficits and slow growth. These SAPs imposed significant reforms, such as privatizing government-owned firms and reducing public spending. Officials went on to sell off a number of parastatals in order to increase efficiency and alleviate financial concerns. By late 1995, Kenya had divested from more than 100 businesses, including 43 tea factories that had been given over to farmers, as well as reduced holdings in large firms such as Kenya Airways and Kenya Commercial Bank. To stabilize the budget, government investment in essential sectors like as health and education was curtailed, resulting in the implementation of user fees. This decision increased the cost of previously subsidized services, placing an additional strain on regular residents. In contrast to the predicted economic resurgence, these SAPs coincided with periods of slow growth. Kenya's economic performance from 1991 to 1993 was its lowest since independence, with stagnating GDP and an annual 3.9% reduction in agricultural production. Cuts in public spending and the elimination of subsidies disproportionately hurt low-income regions, exacerbating poverty and inequality. User fees for healthcare and education further restricted access for low-income groups, resulting in worsening health indicators and lower educational achievement. Public dissatisfaction, fueled by the SAP's socio-economic hardships, resulted in protests and political upheaval. Many Kenyans believed that these projects were externally imposed and poorly linked with the country's needs, weakening faith in both the domestic government and international financial institutions. Experts have criticized the SAPs for exacerbating Kenya's structural issues, pointing out that rapid privatization and austerity, along with insufficient social safety nets, resulted in increased unemployment and underemployment. Furthermore, the emphasis on market liberalization ignored the need for strong institutions, leaving room for market failures and corruption. Let's look at why nations, including BRICS members, are unsatisfied with the IMF. Global South nations have sharply criticized the International Monetary Fund's lending practices and policies. Structural adjustment initiatives are a major problem. In the 1980s and 1990s, the IMF adopted SAPs that prioritized austerity, privatization, and trade liberalization. These initiatives sought to stabilize economies and stimulate prosperity, but they frequently had negative consequences. Critics claim that SAPs led in lower public spending on key services like as healthcare and education, disproportionately harming disadvantaged groups. Furthermore, the change to export-led growth exposed emerging nations to global market instability, resulting in overproduction and falling commodity prices, exacerbating poverty, inequality, and loss of sovereignty. The conditions tied to IMF loans are seen to weaken national sovereignty by requiring governments to implement specified economic policies. This external imposition may hinder a country's capacity to pursue development options customized to its own socioeconomic circumstances. Critics argue that such interventions frequently favor the interests of wealthier creditor nations over those of borrowing countries, potentially neglecting local needs and realities. Governance-biased critics argue that the IMF's governance structure favors wealthy economies. A quota system determines voting power inside the IMF, with wealthier countries having more influence. This structure may isolate poor nations, resulting in choices that may not serve their best interests. Reform efforts have been sluggish, and gaps in representation continue, strengthening the IMF's image as a neo-colonial agency. Debt burden. The IMF's debt restructuring strategy has been criticized for offering little assistance and failing to address the underlying causes of financial crises. Without a fair global legal framework, debtor countries frequently face disadvantageous conditions, locking them in borrowing and repayment cycles that impede long-term growth. This condition may result in prolonged economic stagnation and greater reliance on foreign help. Impact on social services. Fiscal consolidation sponsored by the IMF often involves cutting public spending on critical services like health and education. This impedes long-term progress and deepens socio-economic inequities, as less investment in these areas worsens outcomes for underserved groups. These comments highlight the IMF's complicated relationship with global South nations, emphasizing the significance of reforms that promote equitable growth while preserving national sovereignty. The BRICS countries have been actively building financial instruments to offer alternatives to traditional Western-dominated organizations such as the International Monetary Fund. This project seeks to increase financial independence and lessen dependency on the United States currency in international dealings. The new development bank, founded in 2015, focuses on supporting infrastructure and sustainable development projects in BRICS nations and other developing economies. With an initial authorized capital of $100 billion, the NDB aims to supplement existing financial institutions by providing finance without the onerous requirements that are commonly associated with the IMF. This strategy gives member nations greater freedom in achieving development goals. The Contingent Reserve Arrangement, CRA, was introduced in 2015. It is a framework for providing liquidity and precautionary measures in response to current or projected short-term balance of payments constraints. With a total capital of $100 billion, it acts as a financial safety net for BRICS members, providing an alternative to the IMF's financial assistance programs. Recent developments. During the 16th BRICS Summit in Kazan, Russia, in October 2024, member nations announced steps to improve financial cooperation and minimize reliance on Western-dominated institutions. Russian President Vladimir Putin suggested the BRICS grain exchange to stabilize food prices and strengthen member nations' food security. This platform seeks to allow direct trade in agricultural commodities by reducing dependency on current global exchanges, which are frequently dominated by Western banking institutions. While the plan got support, experts believe that building such an exchange will need substantial preparation work and may take several years to become operational. The BRICS presidents supported the establishment of a common cross-border payment system to promote commerce among member nations and minimize dependency on the US dollar. This endeavor includes the creation of BRICS Pay, a decentralized payment messaging system that allows transactions in local currencies. By encouraging settlements in national currencies, BRICS hopes to strengthen financial sovereignty and build a more balanced international monetary system. That's it for this video. Thank you for viewing this video. We appreciate you visiting us today. If our work resonated with you or inspired you, please consider showing your support by liking it and subscribing to keep connected with our community. We greatly appreciate your support. You may watch another video from our channel, which is currently displayed on the screen.